afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Democratic View. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and with me today is an old friend, a man who has been here today, who plays a very important role out here on the East End. His name is Bob DeLuca, and he's the executive director of a group called the Group for the East End, which was started out as a group for the South Fork.
That's right. We started in Bridgehampton as a group for the South Fork.
I know. I've seen that they've shown an early show about how you guys were trying to prevent Bridgehampton Commons.
Yeah, right. 1971, 72.
Really?
Yeah.
That long ago?
Yep.
Is that old?
And we were founded in 1972.
Great.
Over that particular project, and so
wow.
things don't change.
So tell us a little bit, for anybody who hasn't seen you before, tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised.
Sure. So I'm originally from Connecticut. I'm from Western Connecticut. I was born in Bridgeport. We moved to Newtown when I was 7, 8 years old, and then to the neighboring town of Bethel. But my upbringing was sort of in Western Connecticut. Spent a lot of time outside. There was a stream in the backyard. Spent a lot of time there. That was kind of my introduction to environmentalism, being an environmentalist. My mother was a bird watcher, you know. And when I went to school, I just kind of took biology as a major because I thought, you know, it had something to do with nature. And as I got more into it, I had to kind of create, back then you had to create your own program if you wanted to do environmental science. So I did. So I went
really?
So I went to Fordham, and I went to Fordham because it was across the street from the Bronx Zoo, which is probably not the best way to pick a college.
But it's a good school.
But I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's right. I'll go here. So, so while I was there, I created this environmental science program, which was an interdisciplinary program, which is funny now because, of course, my daughter is applying to schools, and they're all like, we're interdisciplinary, and blah, blah. I was like, I was ahead of my time. But, and then from there, I went to the forestry school at Syracuse, and coming out of there, my first job after I got my master's degree was at Group for the South Fork, and I was hired there as an environmental analyst, and I worked there for a while. Then I went to Suffolk County for a while, and I worked in the Office of Ecology, which is the office that dealt at that time with the review of subdivision designs and things like that, and also the Peconic Estuary Program. Then 1992, I came back to Group for the South Fork then and Group for the East End now, and have been there in this capacity since that time. And somewhere along the way, I taught at Southampton College, environmental advocacy courses and things like that.
Aha, wow, what an interesting background. So you have been fighting for nature for a long, long time.
Well, there's always plenty to do, right?
Well, there certainly is plenty to do. I mean,
Never run out of stuff to do.
Yeah, true.
Every day's an adventure, you know.
I can imagine, yeah. But you're never bored, I'll bet.
Not once. I got to tell you, this job, there is not a day in the last 23, 24 years, however long I've been there, that it's the same any day, that it's boring any day. So that may have something to do with me, but I you know, because I like to do a lot of different things. But it's true. The issues are very different. You deal with people. You deal with science. You deal with planning and policy. You deal with raising money. You deal with you know, running education programs. There's always something different going on, and so it's, you know, it's fun in that respect. I mean, it's never the same. So
yes, that's the same thing with teaching.
Yes.
You're never bored. As a matter of fact, it's always like, oh my goodness, it's almost 3 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I didn't even get this in.
Yeah.
You know? And that's a very exciting way to live because you're always sort of working to get another thing done. And I guess it makes us a little hyper.
Well, I used to find when I taught at Southampton, you know, every time you get a class, you know, of kids, you know, it's really, you don't know who you have, right? And you have to kind of, and we used to do this advocacy class, and I used to try to get people to figure out what they were good at, and it didn't have to be like a school thing. And then from that, we tried to find assignments for people in some kind of an advocacy campaign, because in community advocacy, that's a lot of what you need to do. You know, people often have skill sets that they use every day, but they don't know how to apply, you know, how that applies to something that you may have to do in terms of advocacy. So we used to do this, and I used to love going through what the kids would come up with. I remember a young woman telling me she was good at folding clothes, and she's like, "You're never going to come up with anything for me." And I put down folding clothes. You know, we went through all these things. And then we would work out assignments based on those early kind of, you know, I'm good at gardening or whatever it is, and then trying to make that match something that we needed to get done. But it's a way to learn a lot about the person because they often will tell you why they're good at it and how they got to be good at it, and they had 7 brothers and sisters, and nobody else folded the clothes or whatever it is. And you learn a lot that way without the kids basically feeling like they have to say, you know, who they are and where they come from. So and it was important because we used to try to run in the advocacy class there, we used to try to run a project over the course of the semester. So you did really need to know who you were working with. So it was different every day and different every
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about an article that appeared in the Star not too long ago, which I had cut out because that's what I do when I'm trying to think about who I wanted to come on the show and what they have to say. But one of the things that this article was about, and as a matter of fact, they quoted you and one of your former workers, Jeremy Samuelson.
Sure.
And it was about the way this development of the East End has occurred and how our infrastructure has not kept up with our needs, at least our needs at certain times of the year.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think that has happened all across the East End where, and it's not unlike other resort communities where you really have two different worlds. You have, it's January, you have the January landscape of people and things and so forth, and then you have July, right? And most communities, like the community that I grew up in, nobody really went there in the summertime, so you had the same number of people there in January that you had in December and July and August. So you built the place around that particular need. Here, we have this huge spike in people and traffic and sewage and, trucks having to deliver things. But the basic infrastructure reflects a community of, 17, 18,000 people, maybe in East Hampton and maybe, 35, 40,000 in Southampton. Add double, triple that in the summertime, and that's why your roads don't work and sewage doesn't work. And so we don't get around to building that kind of infrastructure in a rural community. And then when you get this kind of temporary urban spike, we have some of the problems that we have, everything from runoff and sewage to road, traffic and safety and these kinds of things. And it's very tough to manage. So it's not uncommon for resort areas to have this problem. And I think here, so much of our resort nature is the rural character of the place that when you think about infrastructure, I mean, if you go to the Jersey Shore, for example, that's a largely urbanized shoreline environment. So your expectation there is that you will have sewer and 4-lane roads or whatever, and you'll get to your beach house and never come out until it's time to get back in the thing and go back to the turnpike or whatever. But here we have our farms and we have our hills and we have the woods and so forth. So I think that, there's sort of a natural desire to not want to go there and say, the infrastructure is something that you have up there. We don't need it out here. It's also tough to run infrastructure that only has the highest demand for a few months out of the year. So
yeah, where does the money come from to do that?
The money, and also something like a sewage treatment plant that has a certain amount of flow, and how do you equalize that flow and get these things to work? So it's complicated. But the reality, the outcome is that if you have infrastructure that doesn't meet your capacity of people, you're going to find yourself with planning problems, zoning problems, traffic problems, police, fire, all of those kinds of things. And we certainly encounter them here all across the East End.
Yes, as a matter of fact, there was a big sort of meltdown in Montauk at the end of last year when people went to the CAC meeting and were screaming blue bloody murder because Montauk has really and truly, I go to Montauk, I go to swim out there at Gurney's all the time in the wintertime, but come Memorial Day, I don't ever go out to Montauk again. I mean, you just can't do it anymore.
Right.
We used to be able to do it, but you can't do it anymore. And that's something that, has really come up in the town to try to put some kinds of controls on it so that it's not just really exploited as a town. Yeah, I mean, come on, it's really was getting unbelievable there.
Yeah, and it seems like that happened. I mean, obviously it's always been busy in the summertime there, but it seems like this recent wave of busyness or lawlessness or whatever it is, seems to have happened.
Lawlessness was better.
Seems to have happened in a pretty brief period of time, and now the town, of course, it's a big challenge to how do you put the genie back in the bottle,
Yeah. Well, I could give them some suggestions if they'd like to listen to me. But also I wanted to talk about is our water quality, which is really endangered right now. I mean, we are, have a lot of nitrogen. I get these things from the County Board of Health of all about what happens in Suffolk County, about how many beaches are closed sometimes. I mean, we had as many as 68 beaches closed.
Yep.
You can't go in Lake Ronkonkoma, without, losing your skin.
Yeah, and some of these it's one thing to have water that looks brown as not that aesthetically pleasing, but in the case of like Lake Ronkonkoma or even here in Georgica and in some of the other freshwater ponds, we have algae that's literally toxic.
I know.
And it's hard to imagine, many of us who've lived here thinking that those kinds of problems would plant themselves out here. But the issue of nitrogen and sort of the oversaturation of nitrogen in the environment, largely from human sewage and in some cases from fertilizer, from agricultural production, some runoff, some atmospheric deposition of, basically coming down in the rain, all conspires to create nitrogen levels substantially higher than they used to be. And those living systems are not able to essentially process that much nitrogen in a healthy way. So you and I might be able to handle much more nitrogen in our own systems than a freshwater pond or a coastal ecosystem. And now we have to reinvent the place to find a way back from that kind of problem, which is tough because a lot of the landscape has been spoken for, right? So it's one thing if you had 90% of the landscape and it was basically unspoken for, but now we're in an area of increasingly small places where we can do good work, whether it's purchasing land, whether it's redesigning infrastructure.
Yeah, there's not much more land to purchase. That's one of the things that has come up on 2016 election. The CPF fund will come up to be renewed and voted on, and part of what the money that is collected when you transfer a house from one owner to another, there's a 2% tax that has to go into the CPF fund. And so what we are looking at is some money that will perhaps go, we're hoping that the water quality will be part of it, and then what will happen is there will be money to help people to bring an up-to-date septic system, not just a septic system that you put in right now, because they're already obsolete. Any new septic system is obsolete.
That's right. And the Community Preservation Fund may have been one of the best things that we've ever done here, right? So over the course of 15 years, you're talking, $1 billion or more available for the purchase of land. It's probably saved 10 or 15,000 acres directly and leveraged other land acquisitions. So one of the greatest things ever, and the public has overwhelmingly supported the Community Preservation Fund. We obviously have long supported that, and we'll support this new effort to take a portion of that fund. And just rough numbers, a town like East Hampton of late is raising somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million a year. 20% of that particular annual income would be available for water quality improvement projects. And in the case of East Hampton, we have a water quality or wastewater management plan that basically has been released. And so we have some goals and some action items to go after, and this will help to fund some of that. As you and I were talking before the show, when you're in my business, it's very easy to identify a problem. It's more challenging to come up with a solution, and it's most challenging to come up with the money to pay for the solution. We consider it an obligation to try to do all three if we want something to happen. And the Community Preservation Fund, by the way, if you go back and you look at the origins of that, for many years, towns were doing individual bonds, for $6 or $10 million, and you had to keep going back, and you had to keep asking people to come out. And the issue at the time was the amount of development was happening so quickly that there wasn't even enough time to wait a year to go to the ballot. And so essentially a coalition of 100, maybe 200, and it wasn't just environmental people. I mean, it was civic organizations, it was local builders, local real estate people. Everybody realized we had a stake in the outcome. And that coalition was able to get the enabling legislation so people could vote on it. And of course, then they voted to reauthorize. But it was, one, a grassroots community-based campaign from the outset. Two, has proven over and over again the value of that type of recurring revenue as a solution. You can't just say, all the land is being taken up and somebody should do something about it. You needed a tool and you needed a program, and the Community Preservation Fund provided that when nothing else really would have. I mean, if you take a look at how much land has been protected in the town and in the region, that Community Preservation Fund, like I say, not only is it the land that it's bought directly, but it's contributed to Suffolk County being interested in giving money to help buy land and that sort of thing. So it's really been a great tool, and we think going forward it'll be a great tool in trying to resolve some of the water quality problems we have.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm putting my money on. I'm hoping that that's going to be. As I've always said, my house was built in 1967. I have no idea what's out there. Well, I do have some idea of what's out there, and it ain't much.
Ain't much.
However, I do have preserve all around me, And what I'm looking forward to is somebody to help me to be able to put in something that will do the right thing.
Right.
You know, and I'm waiting for Suffolk County. I know that there are some trials going on right now with some different kinds of septic systems.
So we think that by the end of this year, maybe sooner, that the county will have a number of systems, essentially, that you can take off the shelf, for lack of a better term, and install that they will approve. The county is very interested in this issue. They know they have this problem. County Executive Ballone has kind of made this, really a pillar of what he wants to get done. The health department's been moving as quickly as health departments can move on such things. And essentially, it should meet up that when the money becomes available to help, let's say, in creating a rebate program, something that East Hampton did very successfully with fuel tanks.
Oh, I did it right away. I did it right away, and it was wonderful.
So if we can do something like that with respect to septic systems, then again, you have a reasonable way to get the job done to help people with the financing that would be necessary to take out an old system and put in a new system. The wastewater management plan will help us to identify where the priority areas are and what should be acted upon most, swiftly.
Of course.
And that's not bad. It's took us a long time to make this mess. It's not going to get cleaned up in 2 weeks, but you're building the foundation of a program that will allow us to have a plan, resources to support the plan, priority action items over time, and hopefully clean water at the end of the day when we get through with all that. It's a great thing.
Yeah, because one of the things I've often said that I think people, has to be said over and over again, which is if you don't have water to drink, that's good. What you have is valueless because you can't drink the water. I mean, I always say I'm going to know because I interview people like you before the guy on my street knows. So my house is going to be the first one on the market. Because I ain't going to stay any place where I can't drink the water.
Right.
That's crazy.
And if you think about it, again, this is kind of the rural infrastructure idea. Somebody comes and looks at your furnace every year because without the furnace, you can't stay warm in your house. If you have an air conditioning system, there's somebody who comes and manages the air conditioning system. Somebody, if you have irrigation, who looks at the irrigation. The septic system is roughly the only piece of infrastructure you have in your home that is buried, and unless it backs up into your kitchen,
that's right.
You don't know what's going on. And most people are just as happy. I get it, but that's infrastructure. That's the way that that's part of the value of your home. It's part of the value of part of your responsibility in the community to manage that the right way. You can't build a bonfire in your living room because you don't want to have a furnace. So we're changing the way that we think about our own infrastructure on our own property in a way to help manage this issue.
Because it's very important. I'm tired of feeling guilty. I mean, I just did a wash this morning and ran my dishwasher, and every time I use anything, I'm saying, is this good? Is this going to be okay? And into the water? Because I worry so much about water. Right. I mean, I know I'm a little obsessive about things, but,
it doesn't hurt. If there were more people like you, we'd have less problems.
I mean, I know. I know. I wish more people were like me. I mean, when it comes to putting anything into my ground, I have gardens and flowers and we grow all kinds of plants.
Right.
Never put a thing. That's not.
And it's. But the other thing I'll say is that it's not the easiest thing in the world to stay on top of all of this. And people have only so much bandwidth available for all of the things going on in their lives. And so when one of the things that we do with the group is it's not just trying to get a policy approved someplace. It's really trying to spend probably twice as much time helping people to understand what the issues are that are going on. So either they can participate and, win, lose, or draw, opposite side, same side, get in there. Local government works best when everybody participates, and it has never bothered me once to have people that don't agree with a position coming and speaking their mind. I think it's all good. I think it also matters that you try to help people understand the way the system works. I mean, if you talk to someone who's just moved out here maybe and they're from, Manhattan, well, why would they know where the water comes from? And why would they know that there's not a big reservoir someplace that's not here?
Right.
You just don't think about that stuff.
That's right. It took me a while.
Well, this is a true story. I had a guy call me up one time and he was talking about his sewer. And I'm like, where are you? He's like, I'm in Southampton Village. I said, you don't have a sewer. He goes, no, tell me. I'm looking at the manhole cover right in front of my house. I said, what's under the manhole cover? He goes, a sewer. I'm like, nope. A septic tank. He had no idea. And, why would he? He bought the house. There's a manhole cover. He's seen manhole covers in Larchmont or wherever else he was. There was a sewer. There's no sewer. So, you don't know. And it doesn't matter if you paid a lot for the house or a little for the house. It's just something that's not part of our general conversation. It's increasingly so, which is a good thing. But we need all, and certainly in my business, we need to do a lot of that, which is to kind of get people having that conversation. It's okay to talk about sewage. It's okay to talk about septic systems, because that's the way that change really does happen. When it becomes something where people just innately feel like that's the right thing to do, they do it. Right? You don't have to send them something, fight them, punish them. They just do it. And I'll tell you the best example, you and I may have talked about this. I mean, when I was in high school, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that organization, I don't know if it was just started or whatever, but they started parking the cars from these terrible, drunk driving accidents, like on the front, in the school parking lots and other places.
Oh, really?
And, that drinking age was 18 back then. Kids were, I knew kids got killed. It was sort of like a regular thing. That really changed to the point where now people, my daughter, she's 18, and I would think, when I was 18, the kind of stuff that was going on, and she is like more careful and, I think designated drivers, and all of that stuff has become commonplace. It was a good thing, right? But it didn't used to be. The cops would drive you home and say, come on, whatever. It was just different. So that all happened, and now it's something you look back over your shoulder and you're like, I can't believe there was ever a time when, like, that wasn't something that that drunk driving wasn't like a big deal. It is a big deal, and it should be, but it wasn't. When I was growing up, it definitely wasn't that big of a deal, and that wasn't 1,000 years ago. It's close to 1,000 years ago now, but it wasn't 1,000 years ago. So we see the same thing with environmental change, right? There's lots of things. In fact, the protection and purchase of land for preservation. I've been at this long enough to remember people standing around saying, this is the absolute worst thing you could ever do. Why would we take perfectly good land and not put it to any, industrious use or whatever? And then we started looking around, and the place started changing. People said, it's not such a bad idea to.
Well, when you look at some of the things that have happened, particularly in Southampton with this PPD, which is the downzoning of land, and you have, County Road 39, they've built a whole bunch of, I think they went up in 20 minutes, a whole bunch of new houses and condos, whatever they are, although they were going to try to put a supermarket that wasn't needed there, an enormous supermarket down on Tuckahoe Road, and now they are talking about a couple of hundred houses right over the aquifer in East Quogue, and some of these things you really gotta scratch your head at and say, wait a minute, are you understanding that you're putting yourself at risk?
It's hard, and particularly with things like water supply. We do live in an area where all the water that we drink is coming from underneath our feet, and most of us have an idea of a reservoir someplace, something that's a protected source somewhere with a fence around it or whatever. It's not always the easiest thing to understand.
There is no Kensico Dam.
Yeah, right, and I get that because you're not from the place. If you stick me in the middle of Maine somewhere, I'm not going to know where anything comes from. But over time, if you don't have that message resonating, reminding people, town boards come and go, elected officials come and go, ideas come and go. You have to keep the resonant message alive so that the policy stays in the same direction. And it drifts. It just drifts, It's not like anybody's a bad, evil person. It just, something else comes up, that's a big deal. And before you know it, a couple of things, we were talking earlier about this, a couple of things slip here and there. And then you look around one day and you go, well, what just happened? Well, it didn't just happen. It was probably 18 different things that happened to get you to a point where you then said, this is too
much. The moral of the story is you have to be vigilant all the time.
Yeah, and I will bet you that most elected officials at the local level, and I will say that local governments work well the more people participate. And look, those meetings can be long, and I'm sure there are days when they would all just like everyone to just quietly go home and be happy. But you know what? I think out here, all these town boards agree that when people show up and that we all kind of hash it out, that the better policy is made over time, if you look over the long term. And, East Hampton has always had a very good public engagement on lots of very complicated issues. The recent issue in Montauk is a good example of that. And I thought the town board, they may not have, at the end, they may not have done what folks wanted them to do who were protesting that. But, they respected those people in protest. They respected them. They let them all come in. They had the meetings. Everybody got a chance to speak their mind. I think what that tells us is we need a better local plan, because otherwise we're going to get the plan that the Corps of Engineers gives us. So I think that, and that's kind of where the town got stuck, right?
Right.
But that was a very productive engagement, even if people feel like it didn't stop the exact thing that was happening. It created momentum.
Yes.
And that momentum is critical to sustain public policy on something as complicated as how to manage the shoreline.
And that is a problem
Yep.
with the advance of the ocean.
Water's coming in.
You know what? I always have to tell people, and I've said it 100 times on the show, that in 1996, my daughter lived out in Fire Island, and we had 2 houses out there. And we had that nor'easter. And I went out, and I can't tell you what it feels like to walk along the beach and from Lonelyville to Fair Harbor, house upon house upon house in the shore.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that will, I wish to God I had taken pictures. We were just like, oh my God, what is this? And the ocean just knocking everything all around.
Yeah.
And it's really, it can happen.
Right, and it seems to be happening a little more frequency than it used to, and the water's coming in, and we need.
And I also wonder what's in people's heads that they build things right on the ocean. And well,
beautiful,
you know,
right? And
we can't solve it all, but in the meantime, we hope we've talked about some of this stuff that people become more aware of.
Yep.
And that's our job. That's what we do.
Absolutely.
We call education.
And I always appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with you about all these issues.
Yeah, I appreciate talking to you because you give me a broader view about how to proceed with things, and I really treasure that.
Thanks. Anytime.
So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I hope everybody listened, and everybody's going to be very careful about the things they use and what they do, and get out there and help.
And they can always find us at the Group for the East End website, where we have lots of information about a lot of these issues, as well as programs, education programs.
.org, right?
Yep.
Yes, I have been on that website. I've seen it.
So you can find it. And you can always, you can harass me by email, because you can email me.
Oh, God.